All right, looks like we can go ahead and get started. A few people, I guess, are still coming in, but I like to give it a couple minutes grace period and then start. Otherwise, pretty soon we'll be starting class at like 3 p.m. or something. So if you go to the Blackboard, sorry if you can hear trucks outside. One of my neighbors is getting a pool, and all of the cement is getting delivered today. So there's like 3 cement trucks going up and down my street. Hopefully you can't hear it. Does it distract you? It distracts me every time they go by because it rumbles and stuff. In any case, let's go to this week's module. Hopefully y'all had a nice 3-day weekend. Week 8, so we're about halfway through the term. If we were going to have a midterm, I guess it would be this week. But we don't have a midterm for this class. We have a midterm second semester. If you're taking the second semester course, not everybody takes the British literature course that's second semester, so it depends on your degree plan from STC. I think the bio people don't take the 23-21 second semester. So just FYI, they're probably going to put you in a regular English 4 class if that's the case. I think that's the only one, don't quote me, but usually it's the bio people that don't need the second semester, so they get removed from the second semester. But you might look into that in case you wanted to know, but we're on week 8. Poetry. So we're continuing with poetry this week. We'll be analyzing. We got a little taste of that from the homework. I asked you to watch a video that explains the technique that we'll use to analyze poetry, the 1, 2, 3 method. So we're going to go into that in a little more depth today. But you should have tried it out on at least one of the poems that I gave you last week. So we'll talk about that. We'll be continuing with our poetry analysis and developing those skills. Before we get to today's lesson, though, I do have some updates for you. Keep in mind that this is another A week. We've had 3 A weeks in a row, mainly because they're trying to equalize the number of A days and B days. The ratio was off, so they are fixing that. Next week is a B week. So what that means for us is that there's a formative today and there's one on Thursday this week, but then next week there'll be 3. Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Also next week, I don't really know what's happening with the whole going back to school thing. We had a staff development meeting yesterday and I thought they were going to talk about it, but they didn't. So from what I understand, the teachers are going back to school on the 22nd. And then people who are doing hybrid, some people will start the following Monday, which is the 25th, I think, no, the 26th. So those, however, I think the district is going to try to apply for another extension, or they're talking about doing that. So I don't know. I don't even think I should report on it anymore because I feel like every time they tell us something, it ends up getting changed around because that's just the time that we live in. But in any case, keep your eyes and ears open. I do retweet things on my Twitter that happen at the district level. If I think that it's going to impact you directly, then I usually send a message on the Google Classroom just because I think everybody's got their notifications turned on there. Let's see, I also wanted to talk about the analysis papers. Those were due on Saturday. I did start to look at them and they look pretty good. Most people have good thesis statements. The length and the depth is good. So far so good. Usually takes me about 20 minutes to read each paper and give feedback. I do like to give feedback on those papers. So if if it ends up being scored an 88, I usually like to think to myself, well, let me explain why it wasn't an A. And let me explain what was good about it that put it in the high B range. If it was, lower grade, then I usually want to explain that. So usually I will take about 10, 12, 15 papers a day. So it will take me about a week and a half to get through them, because they're about 20 minutes each, 15, 20 minutes each, and that adds up. I've just noticed that if I grade more than 10 or 12 papers a day, I get grumpy. And you don't want me grading your paper when I'm grumpy, because the grades tend to go down. So I try to keep it at that. So what I'll be doing over the next few days is reading them and making my comments and sending them back to you. I think you get a notification when it gets sent back or when it's been graded. So you should be getting those over the next few days, as I'm working on them. But any questions on that? How do you feel like it went? Anybody want to comment? I'm trying pretty hard to make sure that you have a good time frame to get your assignments done. I try to give you everything on Monday for the week, because I'm starting to hear, well, a little bit from some of the teachers in the meetings yesterday, but also from students. I also teach an independent studies class, and most of the students in there were students last year in my dual and English 4 AP classes. And I hear from them sometimes that I don't think that everybody's giving you like the week's worth of material. Is that right? You're kind of getting it day by day from some people, from some teachers. Is that accurate?
Most of the teachers give us like every other day, like homework.
Yeah, like on the B day or on the A day. Yeah. So here's what I'm thinking about that. I'm just trying to put myself in your position, and I'm thinking, well, if I had myself set up to do a certain thing on say a Thursday, but then that morning 2 of my teachers dropped assignments that were due by the end of the day that day, then I have to move everything off my plate so I can do those. Like, it takes a priority then because of the timing, right? So I'm trying to do my best to make this class more helpful to you by giving you enough time to do the longer assignments like the paper, and that way you can get started on it and it's not due, you know, like that same week that it was assigned. And also the weekly assignments. I want to make it clear that even if I'm making assignments due on Saturday or Sunday, you don't have to turn them in on those days. I'm not mandating that you have to work on the weekends. I think people do, but you can turn it in sooner. The assignments are always right there. I just think that I'm trying to be as flexible as possible with things, because I know that other courses aren't as flexible, and I can't do anything about that. But I'm trying to make it so that, you know, maybe it looks like a lot when it's the week there, but you can decide how and when you get that done. And then I'm staggering the due dates for the different things. So I hope that if you feel like something is too short of a deadline or there's an issue, I know that it's weird to contact your instructor and mention that to them, but we're in a weird time. And, you know, I'm making my assignments the way I know best, but I don't know what you're facing in the other classes. I don't know what the other teachers are doing completely. So, you know, if something seems like it's not doable or there's some other thing that I don't know about, I wish you would let me know. Um, you know, communication like that is helpful, because I can be flexible on things and change deadlines if it's better for everybody. But I'm trying to be mindful of that. Okay, a few things for seniors, because Apply Texas and FAFSA are going on right now. Next week, the counselors are going to set aside a Zoom call during class. I'm not sure which day it is. I'll have to let you know next Tuesday, but they're going to do the same sort of thing that they did with Apply Texas, but with FAFSA. So if you are working on your FAFSA, you have questions, etc., they're going to be here to answer your questions for you. Also, I think there's a financial aid night. I have to make a note about that. Next Tuesday. I saw it on the calendar, but I'm not sure that they finalized that date. And so they do that in the evening because there's a part of FAFSA that your parents have to do. And so then they do it in the evening so that they can help the parents do their part or answer whatever other questions you might have. So you should be working on completing that, and you're going to get a little bit of help next week on that should you need it. What else? Apply Texas, you should be working on that as well, seniors. The essays, I've been looking over ones that people have sent me. I usually get, you know, maybe 6 or 7 a week where people have a draft and they want to get some feedback. So I'd be glad to give you feedback on your essay. Remember that they use them not just for the application, but also for whether or not they want to give you a scholarship to their school. So it's important to make sure that your essay is in its best possible shape. And if you need some help with that, or say you're getting started and you don't really know what to do with the essay, you can do the seminar that I created here, which is like a series of videos, or you can, you know, share your paper with me and we can go back and forth on it. Another thing, senior pics will be taken next week. So you should have received an email, seniors, about your specific time that you're supposed to come. They're doing them in the choir room from what I understand. And you will arrive in time to meet your appointment, whatever time they send you. And then you will leave when you're done. So if this is for the yearbook, so if you're used to seeing the pictures where the guys are all wearing tuxedos and the girls are wearing the black velvet drape, that's these pictures. Plus they also do pictures in your own outfit. So you should arrive with, you know, your whatever dress up thing you want to wear. They do those pictures and then they change you into the yearbook look. And that's happening next week, Thursday and Friday. So you should check your email. If you didn't get an email on that, then the person you want to contact is Miss Garcia, the journalism teacher. And if you need her email, you can email me and I'll send it to you. But if you didn't get an invitation to that, you might want to, because I'm assuming you want to come out in the yearbook. Also, they offer packages of the pictures. So any questions about senior pictures next week? They do another session in the spring for cap and gown, but this is the just the senior pictures. They probably have you leaning on a 2021 or something, like a big, you know, that kind of deal. All right, I guess that's it for updates. Let's move on and talk about our material for today. There is a formative for today. So make sure that you get to that, please. Also, I wanted to take a little bit of time to go through the most recent textbook assignments that I made for you. They weren't for, I did not assign them last week. I assigned them the week before, but I didn't have a chance to go over them in our last class because I was busy sharing some spoken word poetry with you and introducing poetry in general. But I do want to take a few minutes to go through that. So if you have your notes that you did when you read those sections, I'm going to go through that and you might want to add to them. Maybe this is a good time to talk about the semester exam. It might seem a little early, but I've been assigning little sections of the textbook here and there. This is a survey course, so you don't have to know every detail from the whole textbook, but plus big textbook. But anything that I've assigned to you, I've been assigning for you to take notes on the bold items. Those items will all show up on the semester exam. So that's why I kind of take a little bit of time to go through the reading, whatever it was that I assigned. That way, if there are any questions, just to double check that your notes are complete and you'll have them to study from when it comes time for the semester exam. The semester exam is, I don't know, 25 or 30% of your semester. And just so you can have it in the back of your mind when you're studying these weekly assignments, the semester exam will have a section where you need to identify or define the terminology. So anything that's been in bold in any of the readings can show up on the semester exam. Also, there'll be a section of the semester exam where I'll be expecting you to apply that terminology to new pieces of literature. So I will give you a new poem that we haven't studied together. I will give you a short piece of fiction that we haven't studied together, and you'll have to write analysis of those using the terminology, not something that we already studied. It's not going to be an exam where I'm going to ask you to recall details from the things that we've read. I'm not going to ask you, what poem of Robert Frost did we read? Or I'm not going to ask you, what is Ray Arthur Larry Pete's last name in 56-0? I don't think that that is meaningful information for you to retain in your mind. I think what's more important is that you have the skill of analysis. And so you'll have to demonstrate that you can analyze poetry and short fiction on the semester exam. So just keep that in mind when you're studying, and whenever you have to read something and take notes, those notes are going to add up to the semester exam. I'll give you a review a couple of weeks before the semester exam, and sometimes I even post like a little practice test, just so that you can see what it's going to be like when you take it. So that's upcoming. Anyway, the section that I asked you to read for last week was defining poetry, and this part just talks a little bit about the history of poetry, how ancient it is, but also it gives you some of the basic terminology here where they're talking about form, how poetry looks different on the page than, say, a short piece of fiction or a play, and that we use lines and stanzas to break up the sections of a poem. We don't use the term paragraph when we're talking about a poem, we use the term stanza, right? This little intro also talks about the sounds of poetry, which is important and also distinctive for poetry as opposed to the other genres. The terms that you need to know about sound of poetry are here. Probably they're familiar to you already if you had, like, you know, English 1, English 2 classes. Maybe you didn't do it too much. There's not a lot of poetry in English 3 if you did the dual, or if you did 1301, 1302, because that's mainly a rhetoric class. So that's usually nonfiction. But you can think back to the terminology. This isn't new to you probably. Alliteration is a sound device that has to do with the repetition of the first sound in words. Sometimes poets will do that to create a certain mood or a certain pattern or rhythm in the poem. So if it's consonant sounds that are repeated at the beginning of the words, we call that alliteration. Assonance and consonants are sisters, they are, or brothers. They are about the repetition of sounds anywhere in the word. If it's a vowel sound, then that's assonance. And if it's a consonant sound anywhere in the word, then that is what we call consonants. So, you know, you need to know those terms. You should use them when you're doing your analysis of poems if you notice those patterns. Not every poem has alliteration, assonance, or consonants, but all poems have some sort of sound element. Maybe there's just repetition, maybe there's rhyme. So usually poets will use those to make it more melodic, to make it more, you know, musical. They talk about imagery, which is a sort of literal device, literally describing the scene or something having to do with the senses. And that is not the same thing as figurative language. Figurative language is when it's not literal. When we're talking about something being compared to something else, then that is figurative language. So that's where your metaphor, simile, personification, you know, conceits, all those things come into play. And that's pretty much it for that section. Just sort of a general overview. Are there any questions on that material? Anything in your notes that you want me to elaborate upon? No. All right, the other section that I asked you to read the other time was a section on reading poetry. And I think if you were going to mark any pages in your text about poetry that would be easy for you to find later, it should be this page. So if you have a Post-it, or, you know, like take the corner and stick it down or put a bookmark, I think that this is an important page during our study of poetry to have handy all the time, because it goes over pretty much everything you would want to look at in a poem. And it asks you questions to help you dive a little deeper into the poem. People always say, well, when I watch you do the poem in class, it makes sense, but then I go home and I look at the poem and it's confusing to me. I don't know where to start. It's too, you know, it's a big challenge. It looks so easy in class. Well, you know, the book we read this summer says that the people who have more experience, it starts to look like that. But you can use this page as a resource to help you when you're looking at poems to figure out what's happening in the poem. Not every poem has prominent elements of these, but it does talk about voice and diction and imagery and, you know, all of the different tropes that we have in poetry. There's a little bit on the next page about theme. So you can use this to help you when you're working on poetry, and really a lot of it is encompassed in the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And you should have already watched that video because I assigned it last time that explained how to do a 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. I'm going to check your homework in a minute. Active reading, there's some information there. So how are you reading poetry so that you can work it out and figure it out? They give you some tips. They give you some examples of highlighting and annotating. Now you have your textbook, so the only way you can really annotate is if you use Post-its. If we were in class, I would probably give you copies of everything so that you could use all your highlighters and your markers and things on it. But they haven't invented that computer yet where I can send a piece of paper and it pops out on your end. Somebody can work on that for science fair. But they kind of demonstrate how you can go through and annotate a poem. I think annotation is especially important skill because it keeps you focused on the details of a poem especially. And it helps you to really sort of drill down and look at it piece by piece. And that's what analysis is, right? It's taking something, breaking it apart to figure it out, and then putting it back together again. So that's what we do in analysis all the time. And I like that they have this example. They also have an example in the textbook of digging, which is a poem that I shared with you last week. So that should have seemed a little bit familiar when we went over it. And you can see how the person has annotated that text. There's you know, lots of right ways to annotate a text. It's just, this is an example. If it's something that you haven't done much, you might want to consider that. And so they walk you through that in that section. Is there anything about that section that you want me to spend some time talking about? No? Okay. I want you to go to your notes that you took from the video over the week. I assigned for you to watch a video with me explaining the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. And I'm going to go over that briefly right now. You should have already watched the video, but I'm going to go over that a little bit right now, just because it's a new concept. I want to make sure that you are comfortable with it. There'll be 3 poems that you need to do a 1, 2, 3 analysis for this coming week. Set up my camera there. There we go. Okay. So I want to talk about the 1, 2, 3 analysis and give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have about it. You should have tried to do a 1, 2, 3 analysis on a poem this week about poetry. I gave you 4 and you just had to choose 1. I tried to keep it limited because of the paper that was due, but we're going to use this process called the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. And I think this is a good way to help you get into kind of looking at a poem, the steps that you would take to analyze a poem, etc. So if you watch this video, just double check your notes that you've got everything. If you didn't watch the video, I don't know if you have your homework done or not, but in a minute we're turning it in. So I hope you watched the video. I'm going to go through it a little bit here. But stop me if you have questions. So really you'll have like 2 different presentations of this process so that when you go to work on the 3 poems this week, you will have plenty of background material to help you. I'm not going to go through a poem today. I do that in the video. I go through that Snow poem by Emily Dickinson. But I do want to kind of touch on the way that we read through a poem with this process. So basically you're going to read the poem 3 times. Because it's short, that's good. But poems are also very compact. And we talked about that last week, how there's so much information and so much detail and references in just a small package that we have to spend some time unpacking those things and kind of looking at all of the components. So rereading, as you know, I mean, I know people don't like to do it, but the more you look at something, the more you will see. And so there are 3 different reading steps to this 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. So we have read on all 3 of these because you're going to do 3 readings. But each time you'll be looking for 3 different things. So the first time that you read a poem, you should try to read it out loud because poetry has the musical quality. But this time is just looking for the basics. I just need to orient myself toward this poem. I need to figure out who's the speaker. Is it a first person speaker? Is it a third person speaker? Does the speaker shift during the course of the poem? You're like, what's going on with who's talking here? Can I characterize that speaker in any way? I also want to think about vocab. Sometimes the poem will not have any words that I'm unfamiliar with, and sometimes the poem will have words that I have to check out. You have to look up all the words that you don't know in a poem because they're all there on purpose. And you can't just skip over it and hope that it's going to figure itself out later, because that could be the key to understanding the poem. So you have to look up words you don't know and apply them to the poem. You also need to look up allusions and other references. If they are unfamiliar to you, you have to look them up and try to apply them to the poem. If there's a mention of a Greek god and you don't know who that is, you have to do a search and figure out who it is and apply it to the poem. You're just stopping yourself from finishing your analysis of the poem if you don't do that, because you're not going to be able to very easily get to the meaning. Lots of times, that's step 3. Lots of times I ask people, so what is the poem saying? What's the message of the poem? I don't know. I found these 3 metaphors, but I don't know what the poem is saying. Usually it's because they didn't look up the things, the building blocks that would have helped them to understand the poem. So you can't ignore that stuff and think that you're not stopping yourself from understanding the poem, because you will be. So you want to look for all those things. You also want to look for shifts. Just in general, does the poem change after the 3rd stanza? Is there a shift in the speaker, or was it about the sky and then the second half is about the sea? Is there some sort of change that's happening in the poem? Because most of the time there will be. There are poems that don't have really obvious shifts, but most poems have some sort of shift. You want to look for words like, you know, the big but, like all the coordinating conjunctions, so, yet, all of those. If you're reading right along and then all of a sudden, but, you know there's going to be a reversal. So that's why I call it the big but. I'm imagining that you're laughing at that. Okay, because usually if we're in class and I say that, people laugh. So after the basics, then you want to read a second time. And the second time that you read the poem, this time you want to look a little deeper and you want to look for the figurative language. So you want to look and see, okay, do we have any symbols? Things that aren't literal. A symbol is a concrete item that represents something abstract, right? So for example, my wedding ring right here represents marriage, which is an abstract concept. So an item can take on symbolic meaning that way. We want to look for metaphors, you know, simile, all that good stuff that you've been finding in poetry for a long time. Imagery is really a literal device. Imagery is not figurative. It's just describing how something is. It's vivid, but we don't usually think of it as a figurative element. But, you know, things like symbols, personification is a type of metaphor. All of those kinds of things, conceits, all of those. So you want to start identifying those in your poem, but you do not want to stop at identifying them. You've been picking similes out of poems, I imagine, for a really long time, but the thrust with this class is looking at the effect of those things. So there's a metaphor in the first stanza, and it's comparing a relationship between a father and a son to the ocean. I can just point to it and say metaphor, which is not incorrect. But if I don't sit around thinking about why the relationship is being compared to the ocean, I'm not going to get any meaning out of the poem. So just labeling devices is not going to help you come up with what the poem is trying to say. So we have to consider the effects. In other words, what is the point of using that device? What does it cause in the poem? And that is a lot harder than just finding the word like or as and labeling it, right? So whenever we notice these figurative elements, we want to see how they're contributing to the poem as a whole. So we're going to look for the effects in that situation. All right, that takes a while. I would say step 2 is sometimes the longest step, simply because poems usually have a lot of figurative language and it takes a while to get through what's happening with all of the comparisons and symbolic elements that are present in the poem. But it's necessary because without a good understanding of those figurative elements, it's very difficult to do the third stage, which is meaning. So the third time we go back to the poem and we read again, and this time what we're looking for is, what is the theme? Just like we did with short fiction. Sometimes you'll hear me call that a poetic idea. So this is, what is the poet trying to say or express? About life. It can be like a lesson, right? What are we supposed to learn through this poem? Sometimes that can be hard to determine. If it's difficult for you to do step 3, if you read it again and you don't have any idea what the message is that the author's trying to get across, you might have to go back and do more work in step 1 or step 2. Maybe you skipped out on a couple vocab words and the meaning would have unlocked if you knew what those words meant, or the comparison that's made to a Greek character or a metaphor. So if this is not possible to do, then it just means you have to go back and do more work on step 1 and 2. I do have a tip though for step 3. And that is, if you're struggling to come up with the theme, by the way, you want to avoid cliches. Right? Listen to your mother is a cliche, like all those things. You want to really think about these as life lessons that are more specific than a cliche. So here's the tip. If you're having trouble coming up with a theme, you can instead think about a topic, right? Maybe the poem is generally about love, I'm running out of room here, or hatred, I want it to focus. There we go. Or death. These are not themes because this is not the meaning of the poem. The meaning of the poem is not death. It's a topic in the poem. And so topics, however, can help me get to thematic meaning or the poetic idea. If I ask myself one question, what is the poet trying to say about the topic? In your book, they call that a subject. That was from your reading back when we did the short fiction. Because you can find a theme also in short fiction. So if you ask yourself, what is the poet trying to say about hatred? What is the poet trying to say about death? The answer to that question will be your poetic idea. So if you can kind of bring it down to its, abstract concept here, ask yourself this question: what's the poet's take on love? What are they trying to express about it? That there's just as much pain as happiness, or whatever the poem is expressing, then that can turn into your poetic idea. So if you get stuck on that, that's a good tool for coming up with your poetic idea. I don't remember if the video talks about that particular tip, but it's definitely a way that you could come up with that meaning. Now, once you have figured out the meaning, it would be easy to have a discussion about the poem or write a paper, because whatever you say here for your poetic idea, you can support it with these elements here, this metaphor, this word, right? The way that it shifts. So you've already got like all of the details that you would need to write about the poem. Once you have the meaning, you just go back here and figure out, okay, well, how was that developed? All right, does that make sense? Anything that you want me to go in more depth about with the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis? Because there's 3 poems you're going to need to do that with this week. This class period is recorded, so you can go back and watch this. You can also look at your notes, and also you can watch the longer video that I did where I went through a whole poem doing the 1, 2, 3 method. That was homework for today. Okay, let me go back over to the Blackboard page. And somewhere in your homework, you should have tried to look for the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis in one of 4 poems. You should have had, you could have chosen any one of these 4. Oh, that's the wrong, am I in the wrong class? Here I am. I'll go to your class. If you click on that Padlet, I gave you the option of 4 different poems to practice the 1, 2, 3 analysis. You were supposed to watch the video, and then you were supposed to practice with one of the 4 poems. They're all about poetry. And these were your 4 options. There was a Billy Collins, a Neruda piece, an Eve Merriam, and a Wagner, Spiro Wagner piece. I want you to take a minute right now and look at your notes that you did on your chosen poem. And I want you to go ahead and click below it with the plus. This is me checking your homework. And I want you to type in the poetic idea or the theme that you came up with for your poem underneath the poem that you analyzed using the 1, 2, 3 method. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. Make sure that you put your name on it. So when you click on the plus, you can put your name, and then underneath it, write the sentence that you wrote for the poetic idea. If you did your homework, you should be able to do this immediately because it's right there on the page. Just copy it off. All right, I'm gonna give you a few minutes to do that. It's not gonna show up for everyone to see. It's just gonna show up for me to see. So once you're done, you can just post it and give you maybe 5 or 6 minutes to do that. Okay, let me see if there's a problem with the link. Well, it happened last period too, and I checked it before class, but I don't know. Let's try. Link. All right, refresh your page and try it again. Should open. Is it working now for you? Nadeli, is it working? Josiah? Refresh the page and click on the link again and see. Just a hint, all of those poems are about poetry. So the question you should be answering for your poetic idea or your theme would be, what is the poet trying to say about poetry? So if you need to edit your post, you can do it with those three little dots. You should be able to see your post. You can go back and add to whatever you had, but all of them are about poetry. So you should have a poetic idea that says, what are we supposed to learn about poetry through this piece? I'll give you another 2 or 3 minutes. All right, so if you were not able to post because you hadn't looked at the poem or watched the video of me doing a demo of the 1, 2, 3 process, or you hadn't written a poetic idea, you can submit it later today or tomorrow. Likewise, the people who aren't in the live Zoom meeting will have until tomorrow. But if we were in class, what I would be doing is periodically checking to make sure that you have your homework done, like today. So everything that I give you is important. I've streamlined the class where I'm not giving you anything just to keep you busy. Everything that we're doing is essential for the course. So if I ask you to read something or do a homework assignment, I'm going to check randomly to make sure that that's happening. So there's a grade for this today. Those of you who were able to immediately post your poetic idea obviously did your homework. Those of you who have to do it later obviously didn't, and use this as a message. You can still get a passing grade later today. People who are watching this on video later, hopefully you watch the video before, or maybe I'll put a post on Google Classroom just to inform you. This doesn't happen every time we do homework, but I think sometimes what starts happening is people are like, well, she never checks to make sure that we did our homework, so we don't have to do it, which is a kind of immature way of looking at college assignments. So everything matters, everything comes out in the end. So this is just me kind of making sure everybody's staying in line with their assignments and doing what's expected as we go through the modules. So I'll give you a little hint, there's gonna be another one next week. So I'm gonna do it again next week, and then it might be 2 weeks or 3 weeks or how many ever weeks before I wanna check on your homework again. If we were in class, I would probably call on you. I might ask you to bring your paper up to the document camera and show the class what you found in the poem. Or I might ask you to just turn in your copy of the poems, just collect everybody's poems so I could see how they did with the annotation and the analysis. So this is like a version of that, a virtual version. But you should be finishing that up. And if you're unable to do it right now, then just catch up by doing it a little bit later. All right, our last thing for today is for me to go through this week's assignments. So no surprise that we're going to be working on some poetry with the 1, 2, 3 method. There are 2 sections in the book that I want you to read and take notes about. One is really short, recognizing kinds of poetry, and one is a lot longer, but the information part is normal size. In other words, 759 to 771 looks like a lot, but they put poems in there as examples. So in figures of speech, they walk you through metaphor, and you might say, oh, I already know about metaphors. But what they do in that section is they will give you a poem and then explain the effects of the metaphor in that poem, which is what I was saying we need to be able to do in step 2 of our 1, 2, 3 analysis. So they're going to walk you through how do you think about a simile to figure out what its effect is on the poem or what its purpose is in the poem. And so that section seems longer because those poems are in there. But do make sure that you take notes on the bold terms, and I'll be going through those sections next time in case there's something that you want me to go over or clarify. I want you to read 3 poems for next class on Tuesday. So it can be the 20th, I think. There are 3 poems about night, and they're all in your book, but I also included a document version in case you want to print it out to do your 1, 2, 3 analysis. It's up to you. Not everybody has a printer, I know that. So if you want to just do Post-its in your book, the page numbers are there. If you want to just write out the analysis points in your notebook, that's fine. But you need to come to class next week with a written version of your 1, 2, 3 analysis for those 3 poems. They're all short. So make sure that you have something down, not just that you thought about it, because if I do a homework check, which I'm going to do, FYI, it's going to be a homework check next week. I'm going to ask you to take a picture or something or put your poetic idea, or I'm going to ask you to do something with it to show me that you did your 1, 2, 3 analysis of these poems. So make sure that you do that. Now, between now and next Tuesday, if you're looking at Nightfall by Octavio Paz and you say to yourself, oh, I don't get this at all, I can't get past step 1 of this 1, 2, 3 analysis with this poem, then you drop everything and you send me an email and you say, I get that this poem is called Nightfall, and I think this is what's happening in the first stanza, but I get confused when I start looking at whatever. And then I will email you back to help you with that part. So it's not going to be acceptable to show up next Tuesday and say, I didn't understand any of those poems, or I didn't do the 1, 2, 3 analysis because I didn't get it. It's your job to come and get the help that you need, right? I'm here for you. I do emails all day long. So you can benefit by communicating with me about how I can help you. This is a school. Nobody expects you to we're not here to validate your current intelligence at all. We're here to help you move along. So I'm going to be pushing you. And that means that sometimes there'll be times that you don't know. That's what happens when we're learning things. So it's okay, and it's expected. So make sure that you communicate with me if you have any questions. There is a third thing, and it's not an assignment, but this last bullet down here, there's not going to be a paper for the poetry unit, but there is a project. You're going to make a video. And I'm not going to officially assign that video project until next week, but I just thought that, I would give you a heads up about it. I think that the more I can do that, the more it benefits you in your time management in our current situation. So I did post the assignment here for you. You don't need to start on it. I'm going to talk about it officially next week. But in case you wanted to know what's brewing, what's going to be coming up, if you've got a lot of other things going on, then it might be good to just know. I think that the first part of the project is due on the 31st. And then the second part of the project is of October. And then the second part is due on the 4th of November. So it's down the road, but you know how time flies. So I just thought I would put that on the radar and put it there so that you could start looking at that project. And we'll talk about it officially next week on Tuesday. Are there any questions about anything from today? Or anything for the assignments for next week?
No, ma'am.
Everybody's okay?
Yeah, I think we're good, miss.
Okay. All right. Well, if something comes up, let me know. I'm looking forward to talking with you about these poems. So make sure that you look at them. And if anything, if you need me, I'm here. I think, guys, that's it for today. If you have a question, you can also stick around at the end. All right. Hope you all have a good week. Enjoy the cool front if it comes through. See you on Tuesday.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, miss.
Bye. Have a good day. Adrian, are you still there? Adrian, did you get the document?